I know that many of you are new to the World Affairs Council, but we tend to start on time and finish on time, so I'm going to make an attempt to do that tonight. My name is Dana Devon. I'm Vice President of Education here at the World Affairs Council. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this program featuring Jeffrey Stern. A few brief announcements. Silence your cell phone, please. And I know there are many new faces here tonight, and many of you new to the council. So I'd like to encourage all of you, sometime in the next couple days, take a peek at our website to get a sense of the breadth of programming that we offer. And also maybe consider becoming a member of the World Affairs Council. We start at $60 for an annual membership. And there are varied benefits that go with that, including invitations to member-only events. Coming up is a luncheon, a private luncheon with General David Petraeus. We had General Petraeus a few years back. I thought he was one of the most insightful commentators I've ever had the privilege of hearing. Also coming up, we have Pulitzer Prize winning historian Joseph Ellis at Congress Hall. Again, that's a members-only event, so I do encourage you to think about membership, and maybe most notably, your membership dollars go to support the education team. We work with about 2,000 students across the city every year. We provide programs that really are specifically designed to inculcate that core knowledge, skills, and sensibilities that we think our children, our grandchildren, God willing one day, will need to live, to work, to thrive in this hyper-connected and very increasingly flat universe. So again, those membership dollars mean a lot to us, and do think about signing up. Now on to the main event, The Last 1,000, a story about a little school that could, the Marifat School, a private school tucked away in the desert slums well outside of Kabul, a school that serves 4,000 students annually, boys and girls. It's a story about the school's founder, Aziz Roish, and the journey he takes from refugee to warrior to self-taught scholar, political activist, and most notably teacher, all with a 5th grade education. It's a story of some of the children and parents who attend the school. It's actually through their eyes that you get a sense of how meaningful it is to achieve an education in a country where 2/3 of the population are illiterate. It's a story about the ethnic, tribal, religious, and political conflicts that seemingly perpetually simmer unless there's some foreign power that's occupying the land. It's a story about colonial power and the implied promises of equality and human dignity that go unfulfilled. And finally, it's the story of courage, conviction, perseverance, and grace. And there are many characters in the book that embody these attributes. The teacher, the students, the parents, and the author, Jeffrey Stern, who time and again revisited Afghanistan, often, I think, at great peril to himself, but on a mission to both record and memorialize the journey of the teacher and his students. Jeff Stern, like Aziz Roish, assumes many titles, including that of journalist, author, photographer, development worker. He's presently a fellow both at the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting at Stanford University Center for International He's a fellow both at the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting and at Stanford University Center for International Conflict and Negotiation. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including The Atlantic, Vanity Fair, Esquire, Foreign Policy, Newsweek's Late Time, the list goes on. Jeff has also helped launch the Goldman Sachs 100,000 Women Initiative, as well as the International Engagement Program at the National Constitution Center, whose founding CEO, my former boss and a man I greatly admire, running for, tell me what you're running for again, Joe?
Treasurer.
That's it. Joe Torsella. So please join me in welcoming Jeffrey Stern. So Jeff, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you to read a section of the book. It's wonderful because it's in the very early pages of the book, and you tell the whole story. You sort of give us the premise. You give us the moral quandary. You tell it all. Right. Not the whole story, just it gives you a glimpse of how gripping this story is. And honestly, when you listen to Jeff read this, you're going to understand some of the poetry and lyricism that goes into this writing. It's almost uncanny how your voice sort of echoes that of Aziz a bit. Anyway, the book opens and you see this physically unassuming man hopping out of a cab. He's stuck in traffic. He's traveling furiously to get, we don't know where yet. He's accompanied by 2 children. He has to navigate ruts in the road. He has to navigate security checkpoints. He's trying to get to U.S. military base, where then General John Allen, the presiding commander of the International Security Forces, is overseeing a ceremony. So would you mind, sorry, we didn't rehearse this. Right there. Right there. You have your thing?
No.
I think there should be one on the.
Can you hear me? Yes. I'd also like to point out this is a free galley, so Dana hasn't bought a copy of the book yet. Okay. I believe it. They dodge obstacles on the dimpled streets. This is the first time I've done this, by the way.
That's okay, it's cool. Listen to the words.
Okay. They dodge obstacles on the dimpled streets, trying and failing to avoid the puddles and old bomb craters, potholes born from shoddy construction and carved out by Kabul's excited drivers, and from mortars. It is February 2013, over a decade since America began its campaign here with a series of airstrikes, followed by special forces, and then a convoy of aid groups. Many roads have been fixed since then to cover up the scars of war. Many haven't. Some were fixed and have cracked again from bombs on belts strapped to men or built into the trunks of cars. February, so there's melted snow and cold raw rain. Mud and dirt splash up on the teachers' clothes, waist high on the youths, and when they finally get to the gate, they look like the filthy street urchins who orbit the base like an asteroid belt, hawking crappy trinkets to soldiers from America and Englistan. Only they're not treated like street urchins. Now that they're in the brace of the American military, no longer beholden to their own countrymen, it's as if they stepped across the threshold to an alternate universe. A man by the gate recognizes the 3 immediately and whisks them inside without even asking for identification, marches them past sandbags and giant cargo containers into the gymnasium where the event will be held. Now they are the ones breezing through, past all the important government types who drove by them 15 minutes before. Among the Americans, the teacher is treated like an important person. An important person because, like others who found ways to thrive when the foreign armies came, the teacher provided those armies with a service. His service is less tangible than delivering dried fruit or pirated DVDs or translating conversations with village elders, but maybe more important. It's psychological and subtle, but critical, especially for a soldier like the one running the war machine here, General John Allen, who lies awake at night thinking of the men and women lost, 541 under his watch, and comes pretty damn close to tears, his voice cracking, when asked during television interviews about them. For a man like General Allen, the service the teacher provides is validation. Oh, wait, sorry. He's the one they can point to and say, here's the thing those good kids died for. Here's why it wasn't all a waste. The good local is what the teacher is. A guy who buys the whole democracy thing, who happens to be a minority, who happens to be concerned with the rights of women. Just one man, maybe, but one is proof of concept. It's not impossible. That there are people like the teacher means there is at least one good reason why so much has been sacrificed here.
For those of you that haven't yet had the opportunity to read this book, it It's captivating. It is a page turner, but the writing is so exquisite, and you just got a sample of that. It's beautifully crafted. Why did you start here? I mean, you have 15 years past, and you have another year to go. Why did you begin the narrative at this juncture?
I think the idea was we needed to start this idea of a countdown. We needed something that kind of symbolized the beginning of the end. And also, obviously, kind of metaphorically, having this man having Aziz literally running towards the foreign forces, I thought was a pretty, I mean, to me it was a compelling notion. And also knowing him and feeling this sort of great friendship and immense respect for this guy, and then there are things like this which to me I would consider pretty demeaning. Having people sort of look me up and down and not believe I am who I say I am, and not believe it's possible that I could be attending this event. And I thought that from the very beginning, having him, running through the mud and getting sort of dirt on him, but he and the kids they're not complaining about it. They're not, and he didn't, and he is legitimately, and this is one of the things that I still don't totally understand about him. He wasn't frustrated. He was sort of happy to be doing what he was supposed to be doing. So there's sort of a constellation of reasons why it seemed like a good natural place to start. And probably the most tangible one is that it was that moment that General Allen it was the change of command ceremony. So General Allen was handing command over to someone else who would run ISAF, and that person's job was going to be to wind the mission down. So it was literally the moment that the mission changed from protecting Afghanistan and helping to rebuild to the egress of equipment and manpower.
In those same opening pages, you talk about the covenant that was struck between Aziz and Allen and the military. And you get the sense that that covenant gets compromised. Do you want to talk a little bit about that covenant and what eventually ensues?
Yeah, so there's this deal that was in some ways explicit. There was the DDR, which was the Disarmament, Demobilization, and Rehabilitation, I think, and the deal was essentially you disarm and we will help you build institutions for yourself. We will protect you, but you can't have military groups. You can't just have one ethnicity being armed and having its own militia anymore. If you want our help and our protection, you disarm and begin building. And not every group did, and many had good reasons not to, but this particular ethnic group did. They took the deal on offer. I think that there are people who say that it wasn't so explicit, that this particular ethnic group were more opportunistic. And it's one of the things that has created a problem for them, because people see that there's a word that's applied sometimes, which is uppity. It's a group of people who saw this opportunity and took advantage of it. And it's one of the reasons why now things are difficult, because they made much more progress than a lot of other ethnic groups did. And it was partially because they accepted this covenant.
I wasn't going to go here yet, but let's talk about this ethnic group, who they are, what their relationship is to other Afghans, the Pashtun majority and other Sunni minorities, because I think that is an important thread that runs throughout and certainly is part of Aziz's identity.
Yeah. Well, so we have some representatives here who can correct me if I get my facts wrong, but the Hazaras are an ethnic minority that are largely Shia in a country that is almost entirely Sunni. And also, at least to me, to an outsider, most ethnic groups in Afghanistan don't necessarily look distinct from one another. The Pashtuns and Tajiks, to me, and I think to some Afghans, there's no defining features necessarily, I don't think. So, you heard that, she said yes. So, but Hazaras are Asiatic. And so there's this sort of dual curse of looking distinct in a country where most people don't, and belonging to a religion that most people are not. And people feel various kinds of ways about sharing the country with people who don't believe the same thing they do. Not everybody thinks that Shias are heretics, but for those inclined to think in a particular kind of way, for some of the insurgent groups, it's sort of an added it's an added curse. There have been periods throughout history where the persecution of Hazaras has been actually institutionalized. There was what Hazaras would call, and I think what I would agree, it was a genocide prosecuted against them by King Abdul Rahman Khan in the 19th century, to basically suppress this ethnic group who were causing problems in the central highlands of the country, trying to unify the country under one banner and call it Afghanistan. And later, Hazaras were banned from higher education, and it's one of the reasons why this school is so amazing, is because it's a school that kind of, it feels familiar to people who have gone to, private elite liberal arts colleges in America. And yet, the people there are people who were literally banned from attending higher education until, I guess, 15 years ago now.
Also, in those early pages, you raise this one of the central moral theme, which is, what do we, as a country, what is the moral and ethical obligation that we have when we descend upon another territory, not just with big guns, but with big promises of prosperity, of economic security, physical security, and you already see that promise, that implied covenant, is also fraying, and certainly Aziz feels that's the most threatened piece of this whole thing.
One of the interesting things that's come out of the media around the book, which makes it seem like there's been a huge response, but I've done a lot of local drive time radio in places that you've never heard of. But one of the things that keeps coming up from people who are really well schooled is like, Aziz seems like a smart guy. How did he not know we were going to leave?
Yeah. Can I just interject one more piece of that? Aziz doesn't seem like a smart guy. He seems like a brilliant political strategist, and yet he launches into this one-man crusade as if he alone can convince the president and all his men to stand out on the withdrawal. Did that strike you as just a little bit naive?
It struck me as out of character. There were a few moments when this man that I had known for 6 or 7 years, but felt like much longer because of sort of the intensity of this relationship, was losing his composure, which was a terrifying thing, even for me, and this was before working on the book, being here and getting these sort of frantic emails. But, so it didn't strike me as naive. That never struck me as naive. Also because previously there were times when things would strike me as naive that Aziz would do, that then I would realize he just didn't, the limits that I apply to situations, he just doesn't care about them. And usually he's able to do things because, you say, well, that's just not how it's done. You don't fit 100 people into a room for 50. And he would say, well, why not? They're all here. Is it 100 people?
Yeah, we did.
So that's the kind of thing so every time I would say you're being naive, I would think you're being naive. I had learned that he probably knew better than me. But the one kind of almost existential mistake was believing that we would be there forever. And I thought about this because people started asking this question, and I tried to answer, and then I would think, wait a minute, I actually don't really know. Why would he think that? And so I sort of went back. I did this sort of forensically in my own head, what it was like in 2007 and 2008. And if you had been in Kabul in 2007, 2008, and stood in the middle of the city, I feel like you just wouldn't believe that the U.S. forces were ever going to leave. Even if you were a PhD in military history and you knew that we always leave, it is contradictory to every piece of physical evidence you saw around you. And so I think that may have been the one way that Aziz let himself look at the evidence that he wanted to see. I mean, to believe otherwise, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes with believing that the U.S. troops are going to leave once you have put down roots and built an institution like this.
Yeah, it becomes scary. It becomes
Right.
a thrill almost. Very nervous. Anyway, the school centers on 3 pedagogical principles: girls, humanism, and critical thinking. Great principles, but why those principles, and what specific outcomes did he anticipate when he centered the school on those values?
So the girls was so painfully simple the way he described it. It was just that, I mean, Afghanistan for its entire history has been run by men. And Aziz's attitude was, and look. I mean, so it was like, we need to change the variable here. And that's, I mean, that is it boiled down to its simplest. But I think that is so striking because I know anyone who knows the region at all or pays attention or hears it on the radio would think that it's really impressive that Aziz has this mindset. But I think that it's even more impressive because to me, Aziz's background is so similar to the most violent and misogynistic Talibs. Because at least one of the ways that I tell myself that people are able to be that violent against women is because if you grow up as a war orphan in a madrasa, and you're separated from any contact with women, you're not around your mom, you're not around your sisters, girls sort of become this foreign thing, which is something that you maybe fear. Either way, they're not people, they're some other creature that you're separated from, almost like, and that was Aziz's background too. He was not in a madrasa, but he had to leave the country in 5th grade. He was surrounded by men. There were not a lot of women in his life. And he came up with precisely the opposite mindset that so many others did. So I've always found that I can't really explain it. Other than that, he's kind of a pragmatist. And he looked around and said, well, men keep screwing things up, so let's give women a try.
He has these great aspirations for girls, and at some point, as the story evolves, he has to roll back those aspirations, and then he has to articulate that rollback. And I just wonder what that must have felt like for him, and what the experience and what the reaction was from some of the girls. Because he prided himself on challenging authority, be critical,
Yeah.
ask questions, basically don't take crap from anyone.
Right.
And then he said, never mind, get married.
Right. I think that's one of the most. I think that's one of the most difficult things internally he had to navigate, and I don't think it's something that I think he tried to not think about it too much because it's a question without an answer. I mean, it's the Gordian knot of a problem. What do you do when your reason for being and for creating this institution is so that people will think critically and stand up for their rights that you believe they deserve, when doing so puts them at risk? And it's like, do you risk people getting hurt for a principle? And I don't think there's really an easy answer. And I think that he for a while shifted to people need to protect themselves and they need to do whatever, for a principle to the wind. It's more important that people survive, because what is education if the person's dead? So.
He also asked the students to be critical of religion in a country where religious tenets are so tightly woven into the fabric of the community. So how did that fly?
But he was also very practical about that. There's a scene that we deleted from the book because it's not that tasteful, but I found it very confusing that the toilets in the stalls are like canted. They're at an angle, because if they weren't, the new building faced west, so the toilets would have faced towards Mecca. So they actually. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought that was a brilliant feat of engineering. We were passing the barns on the way here, and I was like, yeah, but do they have sideways toilets? So he's practical, and he doesn't thumb his nose, but the idea is, and I guess I feel a little, well, I shouldn't feel weird speaking for him, I did for 350 pages. If I may, I think that from Aziz's point of view, one of the big problems with Afghanistan, other than that it's just always been men running it, is that a lot of people are able to claim power because they have a lot of money, or because they command an army, or because they command a congregation, or because they claim to be descendants from the prophets, or some other sort of external reason why they're able to say, do this, and people do. And for Aziz, and he had witnessed this, and he had witnessed this terrible civil war, civilians being massacred and raped and brutalized. And to him, the only way people could do that to one another was because they hadn't really thought about it. And so the idea for him was the next time some cleric, or even if it wasn't religious, or some person who receives patronage from a country next door says, okay, go kill those people, that there would be a community of people who would get up and say, okay, but why? And that was the sort of the real practical reason for critical thinking. It wasn't only it's nice to have kids who are smart. It's also we need to inoculate the community against this kind of thing because it will happen again.
You tell the story not just through the eyes of Aziz, but also through the eyes of a number of students. I thought that was a great device because, one, it's another way to validate Aziz's mission. Two, we got yet another more visceral glimpse of the horror of living under the Taliban rule. And three, we the reader get to care more deeply about the story. So which came first? Did you decide to write the book? And then when you said, okay, I'm going to write this story, did you know immediately that you were going to use the voices of the students as well as Aziz? Or did you then meet the students and say, wait, there's multiple ways, there's shifting perspectives that can really enrich this narrative?
I think it was more the latter. I would like to say I had the foresight. The only thing is that I guess, credit I would give myself for doing that was just that that's always been the thing that's been the most interesting and rewarding to me, is taking a person with a perspective that I don't know and seeing if I can understand it. But then wrote the proposal for a book, got a book deal, which was like, oh my God, I got a book deal. And then it was like, well, crap, I have to go to Afghanistan and figure out a way to actually write this. And the book is a countdown. And I was going to witness the countdown and hope that something interesting happened. But also really hope that nothing interesting happened, because it was a community of people that I cared so much about. And interesting things happening were probably not going to be good things. And so I was sitting there for a month, 2 months, recording everything and writing notes and organizing notes and thinking, this is just going to be a really terrible, boring book. And then it was the end. And I was actually on the phone. I don't know. I guess I was on Skype or something and I think it was my older sister Margot, who said, "Why does it have to be that way? Do the thing that you always like to do. Go find people and tell their stories." And there were a couple of things that I knew I wanted to do. There were a couple of things that were happening. The Hazaras have always, or not always, but for hundreds of years, gone to Quetta in Pakistan. It's a place of refuge for them, and they've really been victimized there. And I had been trying to generate some kind of attention, and read a few articles, small articles that were online at places, and people weren't really paying attention. I think it was the kind of thing where, what does 200 people dying in a bombing in Baluchistan mean? I mean, it's a hard thing to visualize, and it wasn't landing. And I guess the idea was, maybe if I could find a person who has an interesting, frustrating, funny, conflicted story, who is personally connected to that, maybe that will be a way that people will sort of feel what it's like to be in that place. And so, in a way, I kind of poached. I mean, I cherry-picked people based on whether they represented a certain thing. So I went to, there's a character, Tamana, the troublemaker. You know Tamana? Really? Wow. So she's great, and that's it. So Yasemin, who's here, who went to Marifat and was my student, I put in quotation marks because I wasn't really a teacher, it's her second cousin is in the book. I didn't know that. That's really amazing. Tell her hello. So, threw me for a loop. What was this? What were we talking about? Right. So, well, with Tom and us, so I asked Aziz, are there any people I could talk to and I could try to tell a big story about them that are personally connected to what's going on in Pakistan? And he said, I have a few people. Here's one who just came to the school. I don't really know much about her, but you could talk to her. And she was willing to talk to me once, and there aren't many moments where I was like very confident that I had something really interesting and worth telling, but that was one of them. Tamina was so funny and amazing and kind of frustrating and tragic, but also had such a force of personality that there needed to be a way for her to be in it. That was just clear.
You tell an unfinished story. You and I talked a little bit about this. The story has no ending. How tough was that to do, and how did you know and when did you know to stop?
I guess I had a contract and I had to turn in but that's a good question. That was really, really hard from the beginning, knowing that I guess in the beginning I didn't know that there wasn't going to be an ending. But the thing, I was talking to some of the Bodine students earlier, the thing that, the image that I had in my head that I was trying to kind of recreate is that picture, many of you have probably seen, of the helicopter lifting off the roof in Saigon, and the South Vietnamese lining up and trying to get on the helicopter. And it was such an iconic image of, to me it was sort of an open question in the form of image, which is what happens to those people the moment that helicopter takes off. And the idea of the book was kind of to pick up where that picture lets off and tell the story of those South Vietnamese on the roof. But it was very quickly clear that there was not going to be a moment where a helicopter took off. That even, and the original working title of the book was The Zero Option. But all the people, the publisher, were like, what the hell is the zero option? But what it was the idea that U.S. troops would leave, and not leave a few thousand behind, but actually leave zero, literally zero troops behind. And so it was the looming threat. But it became clear that it wasn't going to be so simple. It wasn't going to be like one day they were all gone. And so how do you end? And I think that one of the ideas that, I don't think it came to me, I think it was a friend, an editor friend, who said, it's actually a good thing if the end of the book is looking over a cliff. What happens next? And so the end is really, you have to look up and turn on the TV and see what's going on in the news. And that's the end of the book. Or just a good story.
Well, unbeknownst to me until a few days ago, thanks to the master executive production skills of Ms. Janet Stern, we
No relation.
out that there are in fact 2 former Marifat students in the country, in New Jersey, attending 2 different private schools, and with the gracious help of Leo Potuak, a parent and attorney and co-founder of the Afghan Girls Financial Assistance Fund, he helped us bring these 2 young women here today. And you have to forgive, it's going to be a little awkward as we restage this, but I'd like to invite, forgive me, Yasameen Mohammadi and Bahara Mohammadi, no relationship, to the podium to come join us. I'm going to yield my seat. If you guys share one mic, I'll stand here and try and moderate. One chair over. So what I'm going to ask is for you guys can sit down, share that mic, and perhaps just introduce yourselves. And tell us how you got here.
Long story. But so, hi everyone, I'm Yasamin Mohammadi. I was one of the refugees in Pakistan, Quetta, Pakistan. We came back in 2005, and that was when we started school. I mean, I started school in Marpat High School. And as you can maybe as you have read or you will read in the book, the place where Marfat is just one of the very poor neighborhoods in Afghanistan. When you first came, my dad or my parents had this option of either living in a better part of the city where you would just have a similar life as we had in Pakistan. We would have electricity, we would have gas and everything, or we could have just lived in the poor area, but we would have a better school, which was Marfat. But then my parents, of course, as Hazaras, they've always been deprived of the good education that was in Kabul when they were living, chose the better school, and the school that was solely for Hazaras. And that is how I ended up going to Marfat High School. And then when I was there from 2005 till 2012. And that year, I mean, throughout my years in Marfat, I met lots of people who Aziz Royesh had actually introduced us to, and Jeff was one of them. And in 2012, I met two other women through Children Culture Program in Kabul, at Marfat actually. And they found, when they came back to America, they found this school in Minnesota, which was an international school. And they told me, oh, there's an opportunity for you if you want to apply. And I was like, why not? I have been dreaming for this all my year, all along. So I applied and I got in, and that's how I ended up to that school first. And then I changed schools, and from a day school, it was a day school, so I came to a boarding school in New Jersey. Yeah, it was long, but
Thank you.
Yasamin is one of my best friends. I've always been impressed by what she has done. So I kind of felt guilty because I didn't read the book myself. It just came out February 16th. Just pardon me, sorry because of that, but I'm definitely going to read it. I read the entire review in New York Times website, so I kind of know what the story is about. It's interesting because I haven't been at Marifat for a long time. I only studied at Marifat for 2 years, and that's because my parents, like Yasamin's parents went to Pakistan, my parents went to Iran because we were Shia Muslim, and my dad knew that living in Pakistan would be kind of risky as most of the Pakistanis were Sunni Muslims. So that's why my parents, they lived in refugee camps in Iran for some years, and then they moved to the cities in Iran. When I was in 7th grade, my sister wanted to go to college, so there were a lot of limitations to go to college in Iran. So we went back to Afghanistan. It was 2010. So I attended Marifat, my 8th grade and 9th grade, and it's one of the best schools I can, like you say, you think it's in Afghanistan, but it's one of the best schools you can ever think of. There's so many opportunities there that are available. Kids are so hopeful, you can't even believe these kids are, when they're out of the school, they see all this news and suicides and terrible things happening, but when they're at the school, they're so happy, they're so hopeful. Everybody is doing an activity, student government, filmmaking, photography, painting, and there's so many other things, there are books that, there's a book, anthropology, political science, sociology, humanism, that Mr. Riesh, he personally taught me, and he had a huge influence on how I personally taught. I used to, growing up in Iran, they have this religious and restricted system that you have to obey the government, and you have to be religious at some point, but going to Marifat, it made me think that the world is such a huge place and there are so many religions. What is the way to bring unity between all these people? And that just thinking that we're all humans. And simple things like being respected and giving respect to other people makes us feel together, like united. So 2 years at Marifat, and then I got into a leadership program from the U.S. Embassy. They chose 20 girls, 20 boys from all around Afghanistan, and they took the program to India, and they taught us English, leadership, and a lot of it was an academic area for 1 month. When we came back, Tom Tommy, I call him Uncle Tom because he's so nice and he's just this wonderful person. I hope he could make it tonight and you could meet him. But he introduced ACFOP to me, and then I also was going to a Star Educational Society, which is the best English school in Kabul. And Hossein Yusufi, he's currently getting his master's degree at Columbia University. He introduced me to ACFOP, and he wrote my recommendation letter, and I got to a boarding school in Pennsylvania as a sophomore. So it's very nice that ACFOP provides opportunity to go back every summer to Afghanistan and try to make it for us available, make it available for us the opportunity to share what we learn here with the people in Afghanistan. Try to make campaigns or meetings or whatever we can to make the situation better in Afghanistan. So thank you, Leo Mutir, for everything you're doing for all the girls.
I'd like to open up to questions for either the students or for Jeff Stern. I'm going to ask that you stand up and project your voice. Do we have a question? You know, I failed to introduce the Bodine students tonight, and I apologize, Bodine. Over 30 years ago, the World Affairs Council co-founded with the Philadelphia School District the Bodine High School of International Affairs. We consider it our crown jewel, and we hold these students in the highest esteem. So welcome, Bodine students. You want to all just stand up and wave? Thank you. Do we have a question from the Bodine students first? We're just going to give first question to the students, and then we'll open it up. Did you guys already ask all your questions? Oh, all right.
My name is Rasul Ahmed. My name is Rasul Ahmed. We just started reading the book, and I just had one question. Did the students at Marifat have any major effects on your life? And did you look back and think you took anything for granted?
That's a good question. Yeah. Next question. Yeah, a big effect on my life. I mean, that there's a book is because of them and their stories, and I may have already said this, but the first time I was in Afghanistan, and I ended up I had a boss who was Afghan and a Hazara, and I don't think I knew the ethnicities at that point. I don't think I knew what that meant. He kept talking about this school, and he kept going out there every week to teach an English class. Oh, he was teaching an English class? Yeah. So he was going to actually teach an English class. And he was sick one day or something, and he was like, will you go out for me? And I was like, oh man, it's really far. And I don't, So I went, and there was this group of kids. Yasamine was one of them. There was probably 10 others. Yeah. And No, I mean, I have this very clear memory of trying to teach English rules. And I've sort of thought, well, I speak English, and I consider myself a writer. I have the best words. So I figured, how hard could it be? And I have this, I don't know why, this very distinct memory of being like, oh, here's a counterintuitive thing that I bet these kids don't know. And I wrote O on the blackboard, and I said, so I know how this looks, but this is actually pronounced this like blood, you pronounce it And one of the kids raised their hands like, what about foot, or like roof? So I think that immediately it was clear that I couldn't just sort of waltz in and just say BS and have kids be like, yeah, okay, I'll write that down. And at the end, and I think it was the first class, and somebody, and it may have been you, said, Mr. Jeff, I think that we've taught you more than you've taught us. And I remember thinking that's definitely true. So they have had a huge impact on my life. I mean, it's the last years of my life really have been because of those kids. And I mean kids, now those people, those adults who are now, more eloquent in their like fourth language than I am in my first. So, yeah.
My name is Clifford Stanton, and Jeff, I have one question for you. Something miraculous happens, and we make you the President of the United States. Everybody else loses. What would you do about this? About this helping the school? Would you do anything?
I've said one of the ways that we've been trying to promote the book is come up with bullet points of arguments that I have. And know that because the book is sort of supposed to be asking questions, not really answering them, it's a difficult exercise for me. But one of the things that we came up with as, this will be a juicy bullet point for media outlets, was the only way to really intervene and change a place is to colonize it. That if you are trying to change a country that's not your own, you have to send 100,000 troops and have them be there forever, basically. And there were some of these like local drive time radio things that I told you about didn't totally get the rhetorical thing that I was trying to do, and thought I was some kind of like Wolfowitz kind of, what are you trying to So there were some heated arguments, but if I actually was in power, I don't think I mean, this comes from such a place of ambivalence for me, because I feel very strongly that I don't want to be sending troops all over the world all the time to solve everyone else's problems. But I do believe that these institutions that we had a role in encouraging should be protected, and I believe in women's rights and human rights. And here, at least, those two things are in conflict with one another, I think. So, I don't know what I'd do if I would. I mean, the honest answer is I don't know.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Jeff, I'm Mark Victor. I was wondering, how much did your protagonist get to see the book, or help you write it, or correct things, or did you just show it to him when it was finished and say, I hope you like this?
So the protagonist, Aziz, was really involved the whole process, and not because I had some very noble view of anything, but just because there was so much I didn't know that I needed him to explain to me. So he knew how things were going, but he also didn't ask a lot of questions. He I think had a lot of respect, even that I didn't ask for the idea of impartiality. Even though we had no illusions, I mean, I was not an objective observer here. I was very invested in this community, and I tried to make that clear because, but he never asked to see it until it was in rough draft stage. And when he did, his was one of the most meaningful, I mean, obviously, I guess, but his was one of the most meaningful reactions, because he read the book as not really as someone who was in the book, but as almost a Persian literary scholar. And so he saw things in the book that I had intentionally done, and a lot of things, devices that I was like, oh yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, that I definitely didn't do on purpose. But it was incredibly gratifying. It was like having the scholar you admire the most, read it and reflect and sort of engage with it. And he sent me a message on publication day here that today is the happiest day of my life. She has 7 kids, so that's kind of messed up. But that was very meaningful. Howard.
Yes, Jeff, some years ago, you terrified your parents with the surprise announcement that you were going to go to Afghanistan. Why did you choose Afghanistan, out of all the places in the world, to start out your journalistic international career?
So I didn't know very much about anything. I wanted to write, and I didn't think I would be able to work my way up through a newsroom in the standard way. And I thought, well, if I go someplace that's interesting and meaningful to people here, and that people don't know a lot about, then editors will have to read my emails, even if they have no idea who I am. And so it was, well, there's a war in Iraq, and there's a war in Afghanistan. And the little I knew was that in Iraq there was this green zone, and to move around you had to have tons of bodyguards, and I didn't have any resources to be able to do that. So it seemed like in Afghanistan you could still kind of get by if you made some friends, and you could kind of wing it a little bit. And so it was Afghanistan.
We have time for one last question. Yes.
Jeff, one other story that the audience may be interested in. Besides the Seas for AS, you developed a wonderful friendship with a blogger in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And the people here in Philadelphia helped that blogger get here to college. And maybe you might want to tell them that friendship.
Yes, Leo, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. So that's Nassim Fakrat, who I met in a coffee shop in Kabul. I'd seen his blog initially, and I met him in a coffee shop, and he became one of the first people who was just very helpful and protective, because I didn't speak any of the language, and I also couldn't afford to have a translator. So this was just a guy who kind of adopted me and looked out for me. When I got hired by Joe at the Constitution Center to start an international, and Hugh, really Hugh, to help start an international education program at the National Constitution Center, Joe actually came to Afghanistan with me to meet with some of the people who we could.
No, I signed the insurance factor.
Right. There's a background to this story that has to do with insurance, which at some point maybe the next book. But so Joe came and he wanted to meet with all of the people that I had become friends with, and Joe sort of saw these different ways that we could help kind of promote different people. And there was one of the people was this blogger, and we went to his apartment. It was kind of an apartment, and he had a car battery hooked up to an alternator hooked up to city electricity, so that when city electricity was on, he could do his blogging, and then it was also charging the battery, I guess. So then he would hook up the computer, something, I don't know. I'm not good with my hands. I don't know what he was doing exactly, but he had this very ingenious system, and so Joe invited him to be a Jennings Fellow. We had this Peter Jennings Project for Journalism and the Constitution at the National Constitution Center, and between that and then he got a media fellowship at Duke, and he got a visa and came, and then Hugh arranged for him to go meet some administrators at colleges, and people just loved his story. He ended up going to Dickinson. My parents kind of adopted him. And in his summers he drives a pedicab in Washington, D.C., and he's now enrolled at the University of Georgia doing a master's in Islamic Studies. So thank you, Leo, for bringing that up. And thank you, Joe and Hugh.
I want to thank the Stern family for bringing all your friends and
No
family
relation.
here, sharing your son with us, and allowing us to introduce the World Affairs Council to all these new faces. I want to thank, and I apologize for having to look at my notes, Yasemin and Bahara for coming down from New Jersey, for joining us. Your presence really just underscores the import of the work that all the people described in this narrative really have achieved. So thank you. And Jeff, you know how I feel about you. I think you're amazing. If you have not read this book, read it, buy it, give it away at Christmas. It is really a phenomenal story. So please join me in thanking Jeffrey Stern and these wonderful students. Brief announcements. Guests of the Stearns will be reconvening downstairs at McCormick and Schmidt, and Jeffrey has agreed to stick around for a few minutes and sign some books. So that's it. Thank you.